Until Death Do Us Part, Love, Marriage, and the Mind of the Killer Spouse. By Dr. Robi Ludwig and Matt Birkbeck. Narrated by Ellen Archer. Copyright 2006 by Dr. Robi Ludwig and Matt Birkbeck. This audiobook is published by arrangement with Atria Books, an imprint of Simon & Schuster, Inc. It was produced in the year 2006 by Tantor Media, Incorporated, which holds the copyright hereto. Introduction by Larry King. Friends, we at Larry King Live follow and report on a wide variety of topics, from breaking world news to celebrity interviews. The murder of a spouse is among the topics that have always attracted intense viewer interest. You'll recall that America and the world was transfixed with a very prominent spousal murder case involving Scott and Laci Peterson, and we followed that case and others on my program from the very beginning. It's these kinds of cases where there are allegations or evidence that one spouse unexpectedly turns violent towards another that strikes at the hearts of viewers. With each new case we are mystified, frightened, compelled, and intrigued. Perhaps it's because we are taught that family is supposed to be the rock of our foundation. Family is supposed to offer us comfort and security, but when that offer is rescinded, we want to know what went amiss. Why, we ask, in cases like Peterson, would a husband or wife kill his or her spouse? What were the signs? Could it have been prevented? What went wrong? To answer those questions, I've often turned to Dr. Robi Ludwig. Dr. Ludwig is a psychotherapist and former reporter who has given millions of viewers an inside peek into the mind of the killer spouse, providing us with keen commentary and analysis. Through Robi's valuable insight, she has helped us all to understand the violent actions and dark logic behind these murders, particularly since many of these cases appear to involve seemingly normal people. In these pages, Dr. Robi Ludwig goes even deeper into the psyche of the killer spouse, taking real-life cases and further expanding and explaining the motivations behind each murder, helping us understand why someone would commit this kind of crime. Forward by Nancy Grace. For years I have known Dr. Robi Ludwig. Not only have I known her, I have disagreed with, argued with, listened to, and most important, learned from her. Her unique perspective, grounded in the principles of psychotherapy and the study of human behavior, has brought a new meaning to the analysis of trials and the behavior, motives, and testimony of witnesses, victims, and defendants alike. A trial lawyer's duty is to learn the facts and law of a case. A prosecutor's duty is to seek a verdict that speaks the truth, and a defense lawyer's duty is to obtain an acquittal for the client on trial. Dr. Robi Ludwig explains the why behind each of these. While the state is not required to show a motive in order to prove its case, juries often search for this missing piece of reasoning. Dr. Robi not only studies the human mind and behavior, but breaks it down in terms of actual cases. Cases that engage us, challenge us, make us angry, and make us cry. Yes, a jury can convict, a judge can sentence, but what good are verdicts if we fail to learn from them? This is the greatest of many reasons that I have highlighted Dr. Ludwig's in-depth and intuitive analysis on Court TV, as well as CNN, over and over throughout the years. She casts light on the formerly taboo subjects of marital strife and homicide. In the Scott Peterson case, Dr. Robi Ludwig analyzed, I believe correctly, the motivations of Peterson himself, as well as various police officers, neighbors, attorneys, and family members. Who could ever forget the bombshell testimony, tapes, and court appearance on the witness stand of Peterson's lover, Amber Fry? The angry Lee and Jackie Peterson, blind to the evidence before them. The suffering of Sharon Rocha, the charming guile of Scott Peterson, and the reasoning behind the jury verdict. Dr. Ludwig accurately weighed in on each, clarifying what we observed in the courtroom. I remember distinctly the night Robi and I sat quietly in a darkened studio, guests together on a Larry King Live broadcast. We were discussing the Peterson trial after hearing that homicide was the leading cause of death among pregnant women. The number one cause of death? I couldn't believe my own ears. After all the domestic homicides and domestic assaults I had prosecuted, I was unaware of that astounding and heartbreaking statistic. In the weeks following, Dr. Ludwig began to make sense of this shocking statistic that plagues our nation. But long before the Peterson case, Dr. Robi Ludwig was speaking out regarding marriage and murder. From Rabbi Fred Newlander, on trial for arranging the murder of his longtime wife Carol, to the murder trials of Dr. Richard Sharp and novelist Michael Peterson, Dr. Ludwig has become the authority on marital homicide, its causes, its far-reaching implications, and the devastating wake of pain it causes. The depth and insight she brings to the table has broadened my understanding of these heinous acts, and of the underlying darkness that is often inherent in so many marriages. Dr. Robi enlightens us all. Prologue. Each day, 6 people are murdered in the U.S. by a spouse or intimate partner. Another 2,700 people daily, or almost 1 million per year, are physically assaulted, victims of what the U.S. Department of Justice calls intimate partner violence, violent crimes such as assault, rape, and robbery perpetrated by spouses, boyfriends, and girlfriends. Over the years, many of these cases have attracted national notoriety through extensive coverage on CNN, Fox, MSNBC, Court TV, daytime and cable talk shows, the Internet, and newspapers, as millions of viewers and readers try to understand why one spouse would kill another. From David and Clara Harris to Scott and Lacey Peterson to O.J. and Nicole Simpson, Americans are fascinated by behind-the-scenes stories of spousal violence. And with each new case and the continual media coverage and fascination it draws, the Peterson case was an international phenomenon, while the Harris case, in which she repeatedly ran over her husband with her car, was also reported around the world and spawned 24-hour coverage, several magazine articles, a book, and even a CBS TV movie, Suburban Madness. We become immersed in another form of reality TV, where the average citizen is taken deep inside the personal lives of husbands and wives to see firsthand what's gone terribly wrong in real time, from tragic event to trial. Why the intense interest? Perhaps because most of us, whether we admit it or not, sometimes have violent, even homicidal thoughts toward our spouse or intimate partner. While the majority never act on those thoughts, others do, and we are fascinated with these crimes and want to understand how seemingly normal, and in many cases flourishing, lives could unravel in such devastating ways. On another level, violence is a dark contrast to what so many of us still believe in, love, and the ideals and promise that marriage affords us. Like many people, I consider myself an incurable romantic, and there is a part of me that will always believe in walking off into the sunset to live happily ever after. When I was younger, like many children, I assumed I would get married, live in a nice house, and have a couple of kids. I also assumed this very traditional achievement would bring me endless happiness and romance. So much so that during my college years I considered girls engaged by graduation to be the epitome of success. Perhaps, needless to say, I was not one of those girls. I remained single throughout my 20s, and the thought of being single in my 40s scared me. I simply couldn't imagine how anyone that age could live a happy life if she had yet to find her Prince Charming. To me, a woman in that situation seemed so alone. And I equated marriage with all that was good and passionate in life. Of course, I knew that not all marriages were healthy or fulfilling, but I did believe that if one chose properly, her romantic ideal was just a careful selection away. I eventually found my romantic ideal in David, a successful New York physician. We have 2 beautiful children, and my husband and I have busy, hectic, and fulfilling professional and personal schedules. But during our time together, my image of marriage has become more realistic. Marriage is not perpetual bliss. It's a work in progress. But knowing that hasn't changed the high priority I place on achieving a successful marital relationship for myself, as well as for my patients. One of my specialties as a New York-based psychotherapist is creating healthy relationships. During my professional career, I have found human interactions one of the most interesting and challenging aspects of my practice. One of my goals is to help my patients understand and support human connections and the contributions they make to a fulfilled and joyful life. While my career as a therapist focuses primarily on the unifying aspects of relationships, I have become, in recent years, an expert on the deadly relationships, expanding my early career as a television reporter to discussing these cases and the motivations behind them before millions of television viewers who often wonder and ask the most obvious question: why do these cases make their way into the public consciousness and permanently reside there? It's not just due to voyeurism or an attraction to true crime. The root of the interest in these cases becomes apparent when one listens to the types of questions asked by many callers who phone in seeking answers. Robi, how could such a normal-seeming guy be driven to kill his pregnant wife? Robi, why would a man drug his own girlfriend? Robi, why would a woman run over her husband with a car? Real people want to understand the motivations that drive real people over the edge. Despite our fascination with the extravagance of celebrity lives, viewers may never be able to relate to them, but they can relate to the next-door neighbor whose seemingly stable marriage serves as a cover for violent impulses that explode in murderous assault. I, for one, was always fascinated by the people who actually crossed over the line and acted on their most severe and devastating impulses and fantasies, in part because I was aware of my own vengeful fantasies when I was angry, without ever acting on them, of course. I was curious about why someone would act on such an impulse as opposed to not act on it. What made such a person different from most people? My interest in those dark impulses widened, and today, between my television work and private practice, I deal with the very real problems of people who, in many instances, revealed their darker impulses from engaging in affairs to committing violence. In fact, many of the marital homicide cases I've analyzed for Court TV, Larry King Live, Nancy Grace, and Oprah repeated a distinctive pattern. For example, it was not uncommon for these couples to appear to be happy and in love. Very often the cases involved love-at-first-sight couples who fell head over heels for each other. Many were high school or college sweethearts and the envy of their friends and relatives. These spouses were often considered a romantic pair, beloved by their in-laws and respected within the community. No one would ever have imagined that death was right around the corner. They seemed to be too perfect and in love for that. So again, we get back to the questions people ask me so often. How could these seemingly happy, loving couples end up killing the other? Were there any signs? Was it true that some intimate partner homicides were more predictable than others? The answers are both simple and complex. In some of these marriages, there was clear evidence of domestic violence that had escalated to a predictably lethal degree. In other instances, the husband or wife just seemed to snap with no warning, no signs. One day they were both alive, and the next day one spouse was dead, killed by the other. The research and discussion of these cases over the last few years captivated me as much as the audience, and I developed an expertise in understanding the motivations for this phenomenon. So when my literary agent called to ask if I might be interested in writing about marriage and murder, I was intrigued. It also struck me as ironic that I, a therapist who during the day focuses primarily on the unifying aspects of relationships, was now considering writing a book on deadly ones, the very cases I analyzed on television. In the end, it made perfect sense. Marital homicides raised some powerful questions that needed to be explored and answered in new ways. After some research, I realized that a book examining this specific issue had much merit. Clearly, there is a dark side to all relationships, though this side does not typically result in murder. Why is it, then, that some people kill while others have affairs, get divorced, or engage in more benign behaviors, like complaining about their spouse? Sigmund Freud took a slightly dim view of intimate relationships. He thought it was impossible to have a bond that lasted for any length of time without there being some residue of hostility and dislike. For most people involved in relationships who initially tend to idealize their partner, these negative feelings become repressed, and the repression helps them feel less angry with their partners. Culturally, we are taught that the romantic ideal is reality, and the quest for romantic perfection is a powerful drive. In some cases, this quest can blind us and leave us vulnerable. When loving couples find one another and decide to unite, there is the hope that each partner will finally be cared for and valued. The last thought people have is that they are marrying a hurtful stranger. But the truth is, we all marry people who on some level are unknown to us, and part of what intrigues us about couples who express their violent feelings is that they are more like us than not. But how much like us are they? So much of what has been written about intimate partner homicide does not fully explain why these people do what they do. Ultimately, there are multiple reasons for these crimes, and thus here we are, exploring the question, could anyone marry his or her killer? Who are these men and women who turn on each other in the most deadly way, and can anyone be a victim or a perpetrator? I have determined that there are 10 specific motivations and triggers behind such murders, and this book will crystallize the profile of individuals who kill their spouses and address these relationships and the fatal moment of the crime, replaying it in slow motion so that the motive, the mindset, and the red flags of such relationships can be illuminated. You will understand that the reasons cannot, in most cases, be reduced to the simplistic motives of control and greed. No, many of the issues are far more complex. You may be surprised to find that these spousal killers may not be so different from the intimates in your own life, and that your spouse or intimate partner may exhibit some of the traits evident in those who kill. That's scary, but surely worth knowing and understanding. After all, when loving couples exchange their vows and say, "Till death do us part," it's not supposed to mean, "or until I get angry and decide to kill you." Chapter 1. Why Marry? Marriage is a dynamic and ever-changing institution with its share of potentially major problems. Although many couples find it extremely fulfilling, just as many, if not more, find it difficult and heartbreaking. The stark reality is that the majority of marriages fail, and many marriages are full of violence and abuse, which sometimes escalates to murder. In light of these potential drawbacks, one can raise a very good question. Why marry at all? In fact, why do human beings pair off knowing there's a greater chance the emotional and financial investment will be for naught? One could ask the question, what's the point? Marriage emerged some 4,500 years ago and evolved into a widespread and accepted institution that bonded families, maintained order, and created wealth. Unlike today, where many of us are searching for our romantic soulmate, marriage was originally more about economics than deep emotion. In her book, Marriage, A History, Professor Stephanie Kuntz writes that until recently, marriage was considered far too important to be determined by something as irrational as love, and was more or less a business venture, an institution that provided for the necessities of day-to-day existence and survival of the species. It was only over the last century that the primary motivation to marry was based on feelings and emotion, rather than the ability to provide stability. Today, given the stark reality that marriage is prone to failure, are there psychological and biological underpinnings that pull us in this direction, and not only once or twice, but over and over again? According to Professor David Buss, an evolutionary psychologist from the University of Texas, we as humans are designed to fall in love. However, we may not be equally as inclined to stay in love. Buss and others believe that it is natural for both men and women to become disenchanted with a mate, suddenly finding him or her irritating, unattractive, or totally unreasonable, their flaws revealing their true selves, and the mind going into the grass is greener mode. For married adults, this often leads to adultery. One look at the numbers, and it's easy to see that many people find their mates unsatisfactory on many levels. According to several studies, a whopping 80% of married males and 50% of married females have sex with outside partners. It's also natural for many married individuals to find some other person superior on most counts when compared to the terribly flawed spouse one is saddled with. Although this may sound hopeless in terms of achieving a successful relationship, what is natural is not necessarily unchangeable. On the flip side, long-lasting happily married couples do feel better about their lives, and they live longer too. According to biological logic, men tend to look for women with physical characteristics that indicate they are at the peak of their childbearing years, while women seek security. But some believe the so-called logic of this theory is flawed. All of us are evolutionary survivors. We had to be made of strong stock in order to survive the environmental challenges thrown our way. While both sexes are certainly vulnerable to infidelity, men are much more inclined to actually acquire additional mates, like a harem, or to engage in a casual fling. If we look at the DNA of love, genes don't speak per se, but they do affect our behavior by creating feelings and emotions that build and are maintained, thereby altering our brain chemistry. Anthropologists have discovered what lay people have known for years, that love between a man and a woman is universal. Marriage, like love, is also universal. So marriage, at least from an evolutionary perspective, functions as a social reproductive arrangement that customarily involves the extended family and provides a way to raise a stable and healthy family. Helen Fisher's essay, The Nature and Evolution of Romantic Love, concludes that all of these qualities, love, attraction, sexual chemistry, result in raising a family with children and increasing the chances for survival. So, to love a child and develop the appropriate paternal investment requires having certain relationships in place. From the biological perspective, the first step toward becoming loving and devoted parents was for a man and woman to develop a mutual attraction. The genetic payoff of having two parents committed to a child's welfare seems to be the main reason why men and women fall in love and swoon over one another. Having two parents rather than one ensures a better chance for the offspring to survive and procreate. Unlike our nearest animal relatives, humans are a species of high parental investment. In every known hunter-gatherer society, marriage is the standard. Not necessarily monogamous marriage, and not always lasting marriage, but nonetheless a marriage of some sort. While marriages in the past were more practical unions than they are today, when marriage is supposed to be love-based, people have been selecting mates since the beginning of time. And when we look for a person to spend the rest of our lives with, we often imagine an ideal Mr. or Ms. Right. An ideal life partner is someone whose personality, compatibilities, and purposes align with our own. If someone corresponds to our internal image of the perfect dream lover, we may fall in love with him or her. But the fact is, we can easily get turned on by men or women whom we would not and should not consider an appropriate marital partner. So if we decide we are going to spend most of our adult lives married to one person, we have probably built up some specific ideas about what kind of man or woman this person should be. The ideal mate for most of us would be someone who turns us on sexually, who would be a great parent, and who we can feel romantic toward. The more discerning person may select someone who he or she can live with, even if their romantic feelings are not as intense as they may be with other people. Even as adults, men and women still want to be taken care of, and many of us balk at the idea of committing ourselves to the often multiple grim realities of responsibility and adulthood. This inability to accept adult responsibility contributes to our romantic fantasies, in which we are completely and effortlessly cared for. And that takes us back to our childhood. Some of the most popular love songs could also be describing the mother-infant relationship, i.e., Leanne Rimes' How Do I Live Without You, or Celine Dion's I'm Everything I Am Because You Love Me. We're often pulled back to that blissful, chronic state of infantile helplessness. In other words, we hope when we marry, our childhood needs and wishes will be met. These powerful fantasies and wishes underscore our deep yearning for an intimate connection to another person. This is ultimately who we want and hope we will end up with, and when we finally fall in love, choose our mate and get married. The characteristics of a person's attachments exist the day a person is born. In every romantic relationship, our adult attachment style mimics the way a baby feels toward his or her mother, who is usually the main caregiver. Lovers can also see each other as a child that needs to be taken care of. From the crib to the tomb, this biological behavioral system governs our close relationships, and there is no adult relationship closer or that has more expectations placed on it than the marital relationship. Freud viewed love from the perspective of the sexual drive and theorized that love and sexuality are rooted in infancy. A person's first love is his mother. The mother first love object provides the infant with not only food and nourishment, but also with a supply of sexual pleasure that he or she will later on seek from his or her adult lover. Freud looks at adult love and sexuality as an extension or rediscovery of motherly love. According to researchers Arthur Aaron and Elaine Aaron, authors of Love and the Expansion of Self, Understanding Attraction and Satisfaction, love can be viewed as an expansion of the self. We are attached to others because they will help us be everything we can be, which, in addition to familiarity, is a major prediction of attraction. In the beginning of a relationship, similarity draws us to a person, helping us to feel familiar with and in sync with him or her. Many people in the psychological community believe the unconscious mind plays the most significant role in who we fall in love with. Some profess that we fall in love because the unconscious mind believes it has found the partner who will finally make up for both the emotional and psychological damage we experienced in our youth, thus making us whole again. According to psychologist Dr. Harvell Hendricks, from the moment we are born, we are complicated and dependent beings who continue to have an ever-changing circuit of needs. Freud noted correctly that humans are insatiable beings, and no parent, no matter how devoted, is able to respond perfectly to all of these changing needs. Fairy tales. Fairy tales and folklore also influence our ideas about love, marriage, and relationships. The attractiveness of many myths and legends comes from the basic human needs and experience they reflect. One of the major themes in many legends is love and marriage. The most appealing characters are the heroes and heroines. The typical hero is the knight in shining armor, while the leading female character tends to be the passive princess, waiting for that one special man to rescue her and carry her off into the sunset. What is of note is that most of these myths and legends are written by men. The knights, for instance, were often murderers and rapists. But these myths embody the male fantasy of what men want women to be and how men want to be viewed by women as heroes who transform women and so become their saviors. Almost every little girl wants to be a fairy tale princess. My 2.5-year-old daughter is going through this phase right now. On the most fundamental of levels, these princess stories, such as Cinderella, are tales of transformation. Most of them are about turning one kind of girl into someone fantastically different, which is also a common thematic element in books, television, and film. Today, there's a huge appetite for these kinds of stories among viewers of reality TV, for example, The Bachelor, The Bachelorette, and Extreme Makeover, to name just a few. The princess theme, or syndrome, is a story of social mobility, the idea that a woman rises or climbs socially by virtue of the man she chooses to be attached to. It's not politically correct or progressive, but nevertheless still holds credence today. There is still a princess attitude, if you will, among some girls and young women, that marrying well, especially financially well, will lead to the life of a princess. The conflict is that the princess has a fundamentally passive role. She must wait to be chosen. In abusive relationships, it is often this very power imbalance that contributes to, and in some cases, exacerbates the violence and mistreatment in an intimate partnership. Sleeping Beauty is probably the most extreme story of the passive role princess. She does absolutely nothing but sleep, yet is transformed into a princess and lives happily ever after with her prince. So what's the psychological appeal of such fairy tale romances? It doesn't matter what time period these stories are set in, or what professional choices the hero or heroine makes. After the "Once Upon a Time" opening, there later comes that much...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?